Hi, my name is Virginia, and today we're going to be baking with Titan Robotics.
Hi, my name is Abigail, and I'm a member of Titan Robotics. Today I'm going to show you how to make TR-shaped sugar cookies. So let's go! This recipe is from Sally's Baking Addiction. The link for the recipe will be in the description. The first thing we want to do is put all of our dry ingredients in a bowl and mix them together. So you're going to want to put 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, a half teaspoon of baking powder, not soda, baking powder, and then a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Then we're going to want to whisk that together. Once that's whisked, we can move on to our wet ingredients. We want to get another bowl, and we want to mix together with an automatic mixer. We want to mix together 3/4 cup of unsalted butter at room temperature. That means it's soft enough to go like this, soft enough to squish. Squish. We want to cream this butter and 3/4 cup of granulated sugar together on high speed. Before any of this, you also want to make sure that your hands are clean. That's a big important step. Here's our automatic mixer. I'm using a hand mixer, but you can also use a standing mixer as well. Wish I had one of those, but I don't. On high speeds, we're going to want to beat this until it's smooth and creamy. It's about 2 minutes. So, yeah. That looks about good. Then we're going to want to add 1 egg at room temperature as well. Then we're also going to want to add 2 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract. Once those have been put in, we're going to beat on high speeds about 1 minute until they're all combined. Here's our dough. More yellow than when we last saw it, but it's all been mixed. Now we're going to scrape down the sides a bit, just to keep everything in the center. And now we're going to add our dry ingredients. You might not want to add all of the dry ingredients at once, because that would make for a really stiff dough. And it'd be very hard to mix. Though, if you really want to, you can. Now I'm going to add the rest of the dry ingredients, and you want to be combining this on low, by the way. Well, the dough is supposed to be soft, but if you find that's too sticky and doesn't seem good enough for rolling, then you can add about a tablespoon of flour. This, I might want to add a bit more flour to this because of how sticky I'm feeling it right now, but other than that, the dough looks pretty good. That looks pretty good to me. Take out some of the stuck dough from the beaters, and it looks like we have a pretty good dough here. Now that we have our dough pretty much finished, kind of soft, now we're going to let it refrigerate for a couple of hours in order to have it firm up a bit, because as you can see, it's pretty soft. So what I personally am going to do is getting a bit of flour on my hands just to make sure that the dough doesn't stick very much to me. Going to get some parchment paper and roll it out. This deviates a bit from the original recipe, but because I've made sugar cookies many times before, I think that this will work out pretty well too. As you can see, I ripped the dough in half. And each half, going to wrap in plastic wrap. Not very elegant. I've never been very good at this, but ta-da, one round. Going to do the same with the other one. The dough smells really well. That's not the correct grammar, but there we have it. Here we go, second round. With these two, we're going to put them in the fridge for 1 to 2 hours. You can store them in the fridge for up to 2 days, but because we want to get this recipe done today, I'm going to just put it in for 1 or 2 hours. And now we wait. Whatever you need to do it now. Wash your hands, clean up some dishes. This is a great time to just clean up the kitchen when in the middle of it. So that's what I'm going to do now. Alright, so the sufficient amount of time has gone by, and we're about to start rolling out the dough and actually, making our cookies. Before we do anything, we want to preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, or 177 degrees Celsius, if that's how your oven works. That's the sound of it preheating. What we want to do now, before we start rolling out the dough, is making our cookie cutter for the dough. We don't have any Titan Robotics shaped cookie cutters, so we're going to make our own. You can just freehand it, but I'm going to use cardboard, this old cereal box, and create a cutout using it, kind of a stencil in order to make cutting out regular shaped cookies easier. First, I'm going to draw a TR. If you're not happy with it, then you can always just flip it over and try a new one. That doesn't look great to me, so I'm going to try again. I'm going to use this stencil. If you can see it, now I'm going to cut it out using these scissors. To get rid of this part in the middle, you can fold it over, start cutting like this in order to get you started. Just like that, we have our stencil. Now we can start rolling out the dough. Here's our dough. I'm only going to use this one right now, just because that way the other cookie dough will stay chilled. We'll want to sprinkle the surface with flour. Not so much as to create more of a stiff dough, but enough so that the dough doesn't stick to any of us. We also want to put some flour on our rolling pin. Then we can start rolling out the dough. We want the dough to be about 1/4 inch thick. Now that we've got our dough rolled out, we can start cutting out our little TRs. Using our stencil, take a knife, just cut around it. It's okay if you mess up, because since it's raw cookie dough, we can just mash it back together. And it's fine if it's not perfect. I don't think the cookie dough is gonna care. There we go, a TR. Now we're gonna put that on our cookie sheet that's already lined with parchment paper. Then we'll finish cutting out this dough until there's none left and our cookie sheet is full. Here are our TRs, ready to go in the oven. We will bake them at 350 degrees for 11 to 12 minutes, or until they're lightly browned. After that, we'll put them on a cooling rack. Once they're hard, then we'll decorate them. 10, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's done! Okay, turning off timer. Cookies are now finished. Those look pretty good. I'm going to touch one. That seems pretty good to me. There. Now we just need a spatula to get them off. Put them on that cooling rack. Cooling. I'm going to make some more. Well, after you've made your cookies, the next thing to do is decorate them. You can decorate them any way you like, with just a simple glaze icing, royal icing, or just cover them in sprinkles. It's up to you. I made another batch and they tasted delicious. But now it's your turn to be creative, so have fun. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Abigail, by the way, in case you forgot.
Today, I'll be showing you how to make homemade soft pretzels. The recipe I use is for Bavarian pretzels from germanfoods.org. The link to that recipe will be included in the description. For this recipe, you will need yeast, salt, flour, baking soda, and water.
In terms of equipment, you will need a large bowl, a small pot, a baking sheet, a measuring cup or two, and some parchment paper. A spatula will also be helpful. I will be using bread flour, which I have found makes the pretzels a little bit chewier, but all-purpose flour works great. This recipe can easily be doubled, but that will greatly increase the amount of time it takes to make. If you are a child, please ask your parent or guardian to help you out with the stovetop and oven portions of this recipe, as we will be dealing with heat and boiling water. Before you cook, make sure to wash your hands thoroughly with soap. First, we are going to take 1/8 cup of warm water and pour it into our bowl. Next, we're going to add our yeast. Mix in the yeast with either a spatula or your fingers, and then mix in the 1/8 teaspoon of salt. You can technically add that in at any point, but I find doing it here helps mix it in better. Because these treats are Titan Robotics-inspired, I want to dye my pretzels red. You don't have to do this. So I'm going to add in the food coloring now. Now we are going to add in a total of 4½ cups of flour and 1 1/3 cups of warm water. You can add it in slowly in increments or all at once. I prefer the first way, but it's possible to work with the second. Use your hands to mix the flour and water with the yeast to make dough. This is a pretty long step, and the trick here is to keep on going. You want the dough to be smooth, malleable, and easy to roll in your hands. This will be harder to achieve if you use bread flour. So expect the dough to be a little bit harder than if you're using all-purpose. So this is really what you want your bread to start to look like towards the end. Notice how I can still tear it apart, it tears easily, but it's pretty moist inside, and it's easy for me to shape it. You want it to feel sticky on your hands, but not so sticky that it actually ends up staying stuck. This is an example of how I like to knead the dough, where I'm folding it into itself over and over and pressing it in. Before we begin, we need to get the baking soda wash ready. Take your small pot and fill it up with a few inches of water. Count how many cups this takes. Then, put 2 tablespoons of baking soda in for every cup of water. This takes a lot of baking soda, which is why you should use as small a pot as you can while still being able to fit in the pretzels. Set this on the stove to a light boil. This is also a good time to set up your baking sheet with a roll of parchment paper and preheat your oven to 400 degrees.
Once your dough looks like this, you're ready to begin making the pretzels themselves. If you're tired, you can save the dough for later and do this another day. The dough will last for at least a few days in the refrigerator, and it can be frozen, although it can only attest to the quality of refrigerated dough. So you're going to grab a clump of dough. You want it to be about the size of how big your fingers are when you make a fist. Maybe a little bit bigger. We'll put the rest of the dough back in our bowl, and we're going to roll it out into a rope. It's best if you move your hands like this. A lot of people like to pull and tug, but what that ends up doing is just making the dough break in half. If it ends up breaking, you should be able to easily roll it back into itself just by squishing. You want to make sure that your dough is nice and smooth and that you're not going to have any problems rolling it out. If you notice a lot of lumps when you're rolling it out like this, that means you're not really done kneading your dough yet, and you need to go back to the big blob and keep on mixing that until it's good. You're probably going to also do this over your bowl of dough. I can just see now that there are little pieces that kind of fall off, and you want that to, of course, go back into the dough rather than on the floor where you're going to have to clean up later. You can also kind of squish it in your hands. I like to do that to make mine a little bit skinnier. You want it to be pretty small. You want it to be a lot larger than the width of a pencil, but you probably want it to be, depending on how big your hands are, about as wide as one of your fingers. So this right here, if you compare it to my finger, it's a little bit too wide. You really have like a great deal of freedom with how big you can make these because they're going to swell up a little bit due to the yeast as you let them rise. We'll see that happen. But they tend to cook pretty uniformly, so I wouldn't be too worried about making them all the same size. And of course, within the rope itself, you want it to all be the same width. If it's lumpy, it's not going to cook right, and it's going to look ugly. Okay, this is pretty good. If you notice, my rope is around this long. So to make the iconic pretzel shape, you're going to take your rope, cross it over, right? You have it look like this, and you're going to kind of twist it and fold it back down, right? So as you take this, you're going to kind of twist it around itself and fold it down. And then you can kind of fiddle with it to get it right, and you end up having this iconic pretzel shape. For the rest of my pretzels, because this is Titan Robotics-inspired, I'm going to be making them in the shape of the TR, and we'll see how that turns out. If you're having trouble getting your legs to stay down on the pretzel, you can get a little bit of water, and that'll really help it stick. For the next step of our process, you're going to take your pretzel and put it onto your spatula, and then we're going to dip it into the water. I just turned the gas off on mine because it was boiling pretty steadily. You kind of just want it at a low simmer. We're going to put it in and kind of hold it under for at least 15 seconds. Alright, so now we're going to take it, lift it up, and then put it onto our baking sheet here. And we're going to continue doing that with each of our pretzels.
Once you have a collection of pretzels on your baking sheet, I like to put some coarse salt all along the top of the pretzels and then put it into the oven. My oven runs hot, so I keep them in for around 10 minutes. You're going to want to check on yours around this time frame. You want your pretzels to be golden brown with no white. It's okay if they're a little burnt, but the feeling of raw dough in your pretzel is really gross. As you can see, the pink in my pretzels definitely muted, and it's very hard to see now, but their insides still have a little bit of that red tinge from the food dye I put in my dough earlier. Once you take them out of the oven, they just need to cool for a few minutes, and then they're good to eat. If you had success with this recipe or with the cookie recipe earlier in this video, feel free to email us pictures of your treats. Our email is frc5587@gmail.com. Have fun!